Welcome to Asian Book Club, where we highlight Asian and Asian American authors. We are your hosts,
Jamae and Sabangan.
and I'm Stephen Park, and we are here for our next book.
Yes.
But before we get into that, I want to clarify some pronunciations because we watch a lot of different things on YouTube. We watch different shows of cooking and things like that.
Yes.
And people, even Korean people, get the pronunciations wrong all the time. Like all the time.
And it's not just dialectical or it's not just regional, it's their pronunciation was downright not correct.
And I don't think it's necessarily a fault of the person. I think we have heard these words mispronounced so many times that now that's just the way that Americans pronounce them. So let's talk about it a little bit. Okay, so first one is hello, which I get all the time. This is the microaggression I get, but if you're gonna microaggress me, at least do it correctly. But it's hello, which is 안녕, right? So it's 안녕 or 안녕하세요. 안녕 is very informal. It's like if you're talking to a little child, you would say 안녕. If you're talking to someone that's your age or someone that's older, 안녕하세요 is okay. There's also further formal Korean, which is 안녕하십니까? But you don't have to say that. 안녕하세요 is okay. Okay. But then, let's go into the food.
Oh my word. I feel like I know which food you're gonna bring up, but go for it.
Okay, so first one, though, is on the cover of this book, right? So first one is what I hear often, which is kimchi. It's actually kimchi. So it's a G, not a K. It's kimchi. Which, once again, I think it's even spelled that way. So, like, how are you supposed to know?
Right.
But in the Korean letters, it's kimchi. The other one that I hear a lot is, I forget how they say it, but it's like bulgogi or something. How do people say it? Do you know?
Bulgogi.
Yeah, there you go.
It's the hard G, the hard B.
Yep, and it does have that R sound, which we're going to talk about later in this book, but it's bulgogi. So, one more time, say it with me for the people in the back. Bulgogi. Yes. And this is the one that gets me. So, in Korean cooking, there's a lot of different bases. There's kimchi, there's doenjang, which is a bean paste, and then
So good.
there's the one that everyone wants to use nowadays, which is a red pepper paste. It's also how you make the Korean fried chicken sauces and things like that, and bibimbap.
Yes.
Gochujang. Not gochujang. I've heard people pronounce it correctly in a video in the beginning, and then
switch over.
Yeah, it's like, how did this happen? Gochujang. Okay. Just had to get that out of the way.
There you go.
It grinds me every single time. I know for you, the word it's pansit.
Yes, it's pancit.
There's also another one, I think.
I'm pretty sure there is. I just can't remember what those foods are. I mean, most people can say adobo,
Purple yam?
ube.
But how do people say?
A lot of people say ube.
Yeah.
Like it's cute when you're trying to make jokes like, can you be my ube?
Wow.
That's cute, but it's ube.
Yes.
There's taho, which just call it that. It's not taho. It's taho. There's also sinigang, not sinigang. I think those are like the common ones that I can think of off the top of my head. So say it with me now. Pancit.
Pancit.
Ube.
Ube.
Sinigang.
Sinigang. And then the star thing for Christmas? Parole.
Yes, parole. So it's not like a parole officer, although that's the closest, but it's like a soft O, parole.
Yes. Anyways, from there, let's talk about more Filipino things, which leads us into our recommendation for the week.
All right, this week's recommendation is a small press close to my heart. It's called Sampagita Press, and they're focused on publishing underrepresented voices. They're co-founded by Kiana Aguilar-Labra and Maria Bolaños, and is majority-led by POC, people of color poets. Currently, their printed works include Sana by Maria Bolaños, Handspun Rosaries by Dina Clarice, Pagong Cannot Climb Trees by Butch Schwarzkopf, among many other upcoming publications. Another thing that Sampagita Press is currently circulating is their literary magazine, Marias at Sampaguitas, which is where you can find, here's my shameless plug, my first published poem in issue 5 of Rituals. If you find it, you get bonus points.
Whoop, whoop.
Whoop, whoop. Sampagita Press can be found at their website at sampagitapress.com, and you can also find them on Instagram at Sampagita Press. And that's spelled Sampaguita. Sampagita Press.
Nice. And that's our recommendation for the week. All right. So, we're in our first read of
Book Club Pick number 4, Happy Birthday or Whatever by Annie Choi. And this week we read through chapters 1 through 5.
And the way that we're going to do this read is we're going to try to summarize her essays just because they're all pretty individual from each other. And then we'll kind of talk about each one.
Yeah. So, with the first essay, Happy Birthday or Whatever. In this essay, it's a hilarious yet contentious story of how Annie's parents start to forget her birthday while her friends find less and less time to celebrate as she enters her 27th birth year. She spends the next day searching for answers of why her parents didn't call. The story then goes on to describe how they celebrate, or more so, don't celebrate their birthdays.
Right. And I feel like this story even starts off with a very sad little bit, which is her friends not hanging out with her, which is honestly sounds like a blessing. But her brother texts her, and what he texts is happy birthday or whatever, the namesake of this book.
Yeah. Oh,
I don't know, it's so sad. Like,
it is.
I don't know. My brother's not great at texting, but when he does text or call me for my birthday, I'm pretty happy about it just because it means that he thought about me. And I guess technically her brother did think about her.
Yeah.
Which is not something her parents did. And that's kind of where we start progressing into the story.
Yeah. I was a little sad about the mom gaslighting Annie. How Annie had to provide proof in the form of her driver's license in order for her mom to still not let Annie win. And her mom was saying things like, that's what I said, August 26th. And Annie's still saying, no, August 26th is your anniversary. August 25 is my birthday.
But she gaslit so well.
Yeah.
She was like...
very gaslighty, very manipulative. She had her way with words.
Because she was like, how would I not know your birthday? I'm the one that carried you. It's like, yeah, how did you not know?
Right.
Am I wrong? Like, I think there was a point where Annie's like, am I wrong?
Right.
Which is hilarious. So her mom forgets about her.
Yep.
She calls her dad.
Yep.
Who, I thought that one was almost even funnier.
Right, because her mom ends up hanging up on Annie and like warning her dad that Annie's gonna call, so you need to know. And then her dad acts like he remembered, but didn't have the time to call her.
And which she was like, it's kind of worse. And I'm like, yeah, that is kind of worse. But then, so the story then goes on to her dad's birthday, which Annie calls her mom. Right. And her mom's like not celebrating her dad's birthday either.
Right. She's just at the salon doing
salon things.
Yeah.
Hanging out with old ladies and stuff like that. Which also, like, I think what they talked about was the ladies being under heat lamps and discussing their perfect, expensively educated doctor/lawyer children. I'm like, man, that's so true. And then she calls for her mom's birthday. And
her mom, I guess, was throwing a little pity party, saying that she's alone, she didn't get a present from the dad, and she's at home eating rice and water by herself.
Which, I don't know, it's just so funny. I feel like her mom's a character, but a character I know well. Like, my mom would never do that, but if she did do that, I'd be like, okay, I get it. She does sometimes do a little bit of gaslighty kind of things, but I felt like this story hit very close to home.
Yes.
For you, it might have hit very close to home because Annie's favorite ice cream flavor,
yes, Jamocha almond fudge from Baskin Robbins,
is your favorite ice cream flavor.
Yes.
And then she goes on to talk about her parents not celebrating their anniversary.
Right.
Which is very different from your parents.
Right. My parents go above and beyond, very different from any family. This is not Philippine tradition, but my parents celebrate their anniversary with their children. There's no such thing as date night just for the two of them. Date night is the whole family, all the time, every time, for any and every occasion.
Which is very sweet. Like,
I guess.
Well, for me growing up, like, my parents didn't, like, we celebrated birthdays and we always went out to dinner. It didn't matter if we didn't have money. Birthdays were always celebrated.
Totally.
But I didn't know when their anniversary was. One of the reasons is we celebrated everything. When I was growing up, we celebrated everything off the lunar calendar, which is very different from the solar calendar, which is what we use in America and a lot of other places. So the lunar calendar, the way that it works, for those of you that don't have to follow it, is that it changes its cycle based off the phases of the moon.
Right.
I don't really know how it works. I just know that's how it's supposed to work.
Right.
But what that meant for me as a kid was that my mom's birthday may have been like February 20th, but then sometimes we celebrate it on like January 15th or like March 3rd. And so I never knew when their birthdays were. Like my dad would have to call me for my mom's birthday, or my mom would have to call me for my dad's birthday. And then on top of that, there was an anniversary in here somewhere that they didn't celebrate. So I was like, I don't know when anything is. Like, I still don't know when their birthday. I have a calendar that I have to look at to find out when their birthday is. But their anniversary, I know very well. And the only reason I now know it is because about 3 years ago, when I introduced you to them, we mentioned your birthday, which is the same day as their anniversary.
Wow.
So now I know their anniversary only because of you.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay. So then let's go into her second essay, which is called Animals. So in Animals, the story starts with Annie at a market in Korea, Dongdaemun, in which she comes across a stuffed animal. A pig? A bear? We get a glimpse of how she nurtured, cared for, and had intense attachments to her stuffed animals, then later witnessed how Annie's animal friends got torn away from her one by one as her mom generously gives them away to the children of family friends. At the end, we return to the story of Annie in Dongdaemun, buying her perfectly imperfect friend Arnold, only to find out that we have been following a 23-year-old Annie. I love this story.
Yes, it's such a good story, and it reminded me of my little sister because even in her 24th year of life, she still lines up all of her stuffed animals, all of her plushies on her bed to the point that she has almost no place to sleep.
Which is very familiar with what Annie went through in her story.
Right.
To the point where her mom came in and like chastised her for not having more than 50% of the bed to sleep on.
I mean, with my sister, she has the option to sleep somewhere else because she technically has two beds. So her first bed can be filled with all her stuffies, and she can sleep on her second bed if she has to.
I also genuinely felt a strong connection to this story because I felt like this is what happened to me as a kid. If family, friends came over, or especially cousins, especially going to Korea to see my cousins, if they ever wanted anything that was mine, my mom had it wasn't even a willingness, but she had the need to have to give it to them. And as a kid, like now or as a high schooler, I care less. And my cousins are all younger than I am. But as a kid, like as like a 10-year-old, and I was kind of a latchkey kid, and my mom wasn't home often, so it's like this lady who I see very little sometimes. She comes in here and she's like, hey, you know that notebook that you have that you love? We're just going to give it away. And I feel like that's exactly what happens with Annie. I'm pretty sure we're not the only Korean kids to have to suffer through this. Sometimes my mom would kind of lie to me because she would be like, oh yeah, let's just give them the thing right now. Like, they'll eventually get bored with it, or when they're sleeping, I'll get it back to you. But did I get it back? 50% of the times. Like, I don't know. It was very hurtful, and I got through it.
The story sets us up to show her tucking in her animals and worrying about them getting cold in Southern California, which I think is so sweet. Like, as a child, caring so deeply for each animal as if they're actual living and breathing. But her mom being very realistic continuously, and throughout this essay continuously shows up saying they're not even alive. Why are you doing this?
So you're siding with her mom.
I am.
Oof. I mean, this, once again, like you said, the story sets us up. Like, she tucks them in.
Yes.
She gives them names. She lines them up.
She talks to them.
These are her friends.
Yes.
But you side with her mom.
Yes, because in my minimalistic adult mind, I see a lot of stuff, and I particularly see the stress and the anxiety having these stuffies brings little Annie.
Which is what she says in her story as well.
Exactly. And like, that anxiety is not healthy to have as a child, to have as a growing person. It's not great. And so her mom generously giving these stuffies away starts to clip at those anxieties. Even though in the moment it makes her unhappy, essentially her mental health is going to thank her for it.
Okay, Your Honor. Let me give you my counterpoint.
All right, go for it.
Okay, so sometimes I'm going to try to purvey the tone that Annie gave, but there's the sequence of sentences that I love from this book that made me laugh out loud when I read it is, my animals and I sensed doom whenever we smelled fancy Korean food, the kind only made for guests. Years of parties had reduced the animal population to near extinction. That sounds stressful to me.
That is stressful. That's fair. It becomes the Pavlovian response of, there is an action, that action triggers a memory, and that memory triggers a physical response, which is this fear of another stuffy going away.
And also the Pavlovian response is usually good. Like, it triggers a response, you drool, and you get a treat. Hers is, I smell food, I drool, and then my friend gets taken away from me.
Which is terrible. I get it. I get from that point of view. Now, I don't know if she still has this response to fancy Korean food. I don't know if going into a fancy Korean restaurant makes her feel sad all of a sudden. But I imagine like some memories come back.
So one of my favorite parts of this story, and for those that haven't read this yet, that are just listening, I would highly recommend that you go through it, but I am going to spoil it for you. So at the start of this story, we follow Annie and her mom going through this market.
Yes.
And the way that she presents it, and I don't exactly know how, because I reread it even, but I don't know, the way that she wrote it,
it's
makes
the
it
language.
Yeah, and it makes it feel like we're following like a 10-year-old girl.
Right.
And she can't afford this on her own, so her mom has to help her. In the end, we find out that Annie's 23. And she buys Arnold, which is like this ugly, half weirdly constructed. Yeah. And I thought that was so well done.
Yes.
I really liked this story.
Yeah, it was very heartfelt, and it definitely pulled on heartstrings, but it also conjured different responses. Like you said, you sided with little Annie while I sided with her mom.
Mm-hmm. And then the next one that we're reading is the third essay, which is Spelling B+.
In this essay, Annie struggles, quote unquote, with spelling, getting a B+, which activates her mom to vigilantly drill Annie on each spelling list she receives and doubles down with mommy homework that consists of spelling, English, and math workbooks. When Annie improves and her mom eventually stops checking on her, Annie goes back to getting bad grades, now receiving a B-. With another round of mommy homework drills, Annie returns to pristine spelling, which eventually causes her to be a part of the school-wide spelling bee. And here, spoiler alert, Annie gets 5th place because of the word liar, the harp, the homophone to liar, a person who doesn't tell the truth.
Mm-hmm. How did you feel reading this?
I felt triggered.
Yeah. I feel like we all did.
But also, even though I felt triggered because of the regimen of studying, because of the pressure of being a student, I also, interesting enough, didn't have the same life experience. While I was growing up, besides my kindergarten year, where we talked about this in a previous episode, where I struggled to read very similarly, my other school years from 1st grade into university, I did everything by myself and I excelled. So I didn't have drills. I didn't have my mom looking over my back and trying to figure out where my grades were, because I was just getting all A's. And that's not to brag. I just pushed through, and I was such a perfectionist that I couldn't not get A's. So, all that to say, despite not having the same life experiences, the trauma of trying to be a perfect or excellent student was still very palpable.
And I feel like this was, once again, directly a reflection of how my parents decided to handle my failures in school. So now that we are smarter with the way that we raise children, we know that things like ADHD or some form of attention deficit disorder
Or other learning disorders.
Right, exist in this world.
Yes.
And I haven't been officially diagnosed yet. Is something that I'm looking into. But a lot of the characteristics of ADHD match the struggles that I had in school. So I remember my parents like offering to buy me a basketball hoop, which is the thing I wanted the most. They would offer different things, and they were like, all you need to do is get straight A's. And I tried so hard. Like, I mentally was like trying my best and doing homework and doing all those things, and I could not get straight A's. It was so impossible for me.
Totally.
But they kept offering. But I do remember, I forget what it was, but I do remember one time I came home in elementary and my parents made me sit down and rewrite vocab words, like consistently rewrite vocab words.
Yeah.
And that's what's like, it wasn't spelling, it was like I had to do the word plus the definition, but also the like
the
noun, verb, adjective, the part of speech. And I had to do this for every single word. I know, and I still didn't get into Harvard somehow. Which is kind of what her story led to, is like she got really good at spelling.
Right.
But I think that's what she meant by the very end, where she once again got 5th place because of this word liar. And then later talks about having to read through this book of spelling because she was a possible like next runner up for the national spelling bee.
Yes.
And she's like, I learned how to spell ytterbium, which is something that I may not know.
Yeah, exactly.
So her next essay is something a little bit more lighthearted, but also not. Anyways, it's called Crimes of Fashion. So in Crimes of Fashion, Annie's mother epitomizes style. Annie is cursed to wear the hand-me-downs of her Korean cousins. This story is about Annie's journey to find her own clothing identity, which requires thrift store finds and lots of quarrels with her mother. The funny thing is, By the time Annie gets to college, her mother's newfound golf style may no longer symbolize the height of fashion. But this doesn't stop them from arguing about it.
Mm-hmm. This is such a fraught relationship with her mom. It's interesting that although her mom taught Annie about fashion so that Annie knew about cashmere and knew about wool, Annie's mom didn't want to dress her well until it was too late.
I don't know if Annie's mom necessarily didn't want to dress her well or if they didn't have the money to dress her well. Because all her clothes were hand-me-downs.
Mm-hmm.
I think if Annie's mom had a ton of money, I mean, this is not something that was talked about, but from the fact that she only used hand-me-downs for a long time, I think if Annie's mom didn't have to do that, she would have probably dressed Annie in Versace. And because Annie's mom was more present with style than it was with, like, oh, let's go find the best thing at Ross or something. I don't know.
From what I interpreted, it was more like her mom didn't dress her well because these clothes came from Korea. Like, because it gave that connection to her family, she didn't want to... Not only did she not want to disrespect her family, but she also wanted to keep that connection. And by having Annie wear those clothes, those hand-me-downs, her mom then feels that connection to family, which then gives that connection to her daughter. And because by the time she was in middle school, those hand-me-downs weren't going to work for her because Annie's frame was smaller than her cousin's at this point. Which is why I say that it was too late for her mom to start dressing her then, because Annie now is finding her own identity while her mom is now like, oh, let me now put you into fashionable clothes because there are no more clothes coming in.
But Annie still didn't like her mom's fashion.
I mean, yeah, Annie didn't like her mom's fashion, but I think her mom lost the opportunity to mold Annie's fashion.
Did your mom used to dress you up?
Yes, both of my parents used to dress me up. My mom dressed me exceptionally well, especially when I was a child, especially when I was the only child, as the eldest. She dressed me up in stockings and these beautiful frilly dresses, which is probably why I love dresses. But I hated the tulle. It was so itchy. The stockings were also so itchy, especially because we were living on Guam. 80-degree weather plus stockings and tulle equals no. It was very itchy. I didn't like it. And once those clothes became too expensive to dress me up in as I grew up, my dad dressed us in name brands from head to toe. So Nike, if we could wear our Nike shoes, Nike bottoms, Nike tops, any name brands, Levi's. This is not sponsored and I am not endorsing any of these brands, but essentially in order to show status, especially when we visited family in the Philippines, we would dress in name brands. And when I started to dress myself in high school and in middle school, I started to like really break away. I dressed in very funky things, which looking back I'm like, oh, so cringy, but that was my voice then and I am proud of her.
Looking back at your old photos of how your mom dressed you, do you think those photos are cute?
I think they're cute. I do appreciate that my mom dressed me well.
Right? Like, that's how I felt. Was when I was a kid, I remember I hated the way that my mom used to dress me. But now, when I look back at the photos, and I don't know if it's because 90s fashion is back up and running, but even like 5-10 years ago, looking back at the photos, I remember having like this green and blue striped polo shirt. And I was like, man, I actually look pretty good in that.
Yeah.
But I remember hated my mom dressing me up in that stuff.
Something I do want to point out is that there, in some of the essays, and I'm pointing this out now because in this essay in particular, there are some outdated and a little ableist/elitist sentiments, which I don't fault anyone for having because of the systems that we're born into, especially in the United States. But something such as looking homeless, which is not great.
I agree, but one of the reasons why I really like this book was because she expressed her opinions honestly.
Yes.
Like, that was truly the sentiment that she believed, but also it was what she was told. Dressing homeless was something that came out often in, like, if you didn't dress well, like, that's what they would say in Korean to you. So I get it, and I kind of, it felt very honest to me. It may not be the thing that you're supposed to say,
right,
but it felt very honest.
That's fair. Yeah, absolutely. It's just pointing out that these statements exist in this book, and even though it might not have meant to demoralize, it might not have meant to dehumanize homeless populations, it's there.
Speaking of honesty, page 58 is when we have that turn of Annie coming back from college and seeing her mom dressed up in her new golf attire. So, let me tell you what she's wearing. She was wearing blue and green plaid Bermuda shorts with a red and yellow plaid collared shirt. On her tousled head was a terry cloth visor with plaid trim, also clashing. She was a confusing map of horizontal and vertical lines in more colors than should be worn on one person. So the thing is, it sounds crazy. All this plaid, all these colors, everything about it. I think she even had socks with pom-poms on the back because it stopped it from slipping down.
Yes.
It sounds crazy. You picture it in your mind. It looks wild. This is how Korean Ahjummas dress.
Yes.
So, Ahjumma is just this word for, like, lady, female person. My mom had this moment where she went... So, my mom's just... She's gorgeous. She's beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
When she was in her 20s and stuff, like, looking at photos, same thing as how Annie felt. I was like, man, my mom was stylish. She was in, like, pantsuits and stuff. She was, like, rocking it.
Totally.
I don't know when it happened. Somewhere along the way, she got influenced. And she started dressing like an Ahjumma. She was like, not my mom anymore. Okay, let me tell you how Ahjummas dress. So if you type in Ahjumma, which is like Ahjumma, and you Google search it and you go to images, very likely you'll find what I'm looking at. So what you'll get is this driving visor, which is, if you imagine a normal visor and then you extend it out to about twice its length, and then you fold it down over your face so that none of the sun hits your face, that's a driving visor. You have lots of patterns, floral, plaid, whatever it is. You got a nice perm going on.
Yes.
Nice little perm. My mom doesn't have the perm, but nice little perm. Sometimes bucket hats. Massive amounts of colors. The thing that my mom did that Ahjummas do is having plaids and print shirt or long sleeve and then wearing a fur vest over it. And it had to be fur. And it was like the fakest of furs. It was the bear bath mat fur. And she like wore this all the time, and I was like, what are you doing? I don't know when it turned over, but she became an Ahjumma. I felt like this look was so crazy that I did even verify that Google search of Ahjumma on Google. And there's like these photos of these Ahjumma gangs like lined up and taking photos together, like Jabberwockies, but instead of the mask, they have those visors. So what Annie saw from her mom's side is that she went into her closet, and this is a quote from the book. She said, "I saw what seemed like hundreds of collared shirts in plaids and stripes and even animal prints, tigers and zebras. I wondered if my mother ever mixed prints, so predator and prey could meet on the lush green hills of Los Robles golf course." I was like, that's hilarious.
Girl, this one was a very funny visually, but also funny to think of. Like, the situations were funny to think of.
Once again, I love this one. It hit home. It made me feel nostalgic about seeing my mom.
To be fair, his mom still dresses well most of the time.
She looks great. She dresses very well.
Yes.
But she still has a lot of vests, and I don't know why.
She does have Ahjumma clothes, though. I agree.
And her hair keeps getting shorter, and I think it's going to start getting curly soon. All right, so then we move on to stroke order.
Yes, the last essay that we read during this week, Stroke Order, is where Annie shares how, although she was born in the United States, her and her brother's first language is Korean. Living in a predominantly white neighborhood, however, also meant they went to school with little diversity. As they learned more and more English, the less and less they practiced Korean, to the point that present-day Annie now still finds it difficult to differentiate between moth,
Nabang,
and my room.
Nebang. I, surprise, surprise, also love this one.
Yes, so good.
And surprise, surprise, also connected so strongly with this.
I feel like I connected so much to this one because I had the same struggles. She talks about how as a child she conversed in Korean, she talked to her family in Korean, and then when she got into school had to switch over to English because that's all anyone talked or used to speak to her. And when she started talking to her parents, it became more of a mixture of English and Korean. And then as she got older, when she wanted to practice Korean with her cousins wanted to practice English with her, which is exactly how I grew up. I remember vividly being able to speak to my cousins in Tagalog. I vividly remember being able to like think and dream in Tagalog. And then as I got into school and my nanay, who is my paternal grandmother, told my parents don't talk to them in Tagalog, only talk to them in English so she can learn, and also so that we don't have the accent and can present ourselves well. Until now, when I try to speak in Tagalog or write in Tagalog, it all sounds like a child speaking because they're very simple sentences, very short, very clipped, and then I struggle, and so I end up like adding in more English words than I mean to.
I'm pretty much the same with Korean, and sadly I had a very similar experience with Annie, and I feel like most Korean kids, where I had to go to, and this is how you pronounce it, it's Hangul is what she wrote, and then I forget how she pronounced the other part, but it's Hangul and that means Korean school. And I would have to, so she went to Hangul on Saturday, and I think I did that for a short period until our church wanted to make its own. So then I would go to church, and then I'd go to Bible study, and then I'd finish off the day with one of the parents from our church teaching us in Hangul.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Oh, this sounds like a long day.
But I now I appreciate it, but I still have that same thing where it's like I still have a very childish voice when I pronounce my Korean words, or if I'm speaking a sentence to someone, I pronounce it very differently than my voice in English. Like I think my pitch goes up like 10 times higher. Like I think my Korean testicles never dropped. My Americans did. Yeah, it's I still feel like a kid when I'm speaking in Korean. Luckily my dad's mom is the one that took care of us, so my grandmother took care of us, and she didn't speak any English, so I learned a lot of Korean very early on, and that's what stuck with me. But if it wasn't for those two things, I think I would have lost my language. And I very much appreciate how not all Koreans, but a lot of Koreans take pride in their culture and teach their kids to speak Korean.
Because of the United States trying to take hold of the Philippines the way that they took hold of other territories like Guam and Puerto Rico, there was a lot of erasure of not just Tagalog, but other Philippine languages and dialects. And so when people leave the Philippines and immigrate to other places, their goal is to not carry their language and not to carry the shame of sounding poor, quote unquote, or sounding less than because our country, and I'm speaking about the Philippines, because our country is not a rich country.
So I would say in the US, and more specifically in the continental US, I think it's not just Filipinos that do that. I also notice it with a lot of different cultures. So some of my Mexican friends growing up, they don't speak Spanish because their parents didn't want them to have this accent. Same thing. Not often the first generation Japanese, but the Japanese Americans that have been here through World War II and survived things like internment camps, they are now separated from their language quite a bit because of the fact that they wanted to assimilate with the Americans and not be judged or racially profiled or things like that.
Right, to show patriotism and to show nationalism
Right.
to the United States.
Right. So I don't think it's necessarily Philippines or things like that.
No, definitely not. For sure. We all have our reasons for assimilating.
Right. But page 67 gives us a grand opportunity to take everyone to Hangarakyo. Okay, so one thing that Annie does in this book is she never translates, which I kind of like because it leaves it all up for grabs.
Right, and it means that as a reader, you have to be proactive in looking it up if you want to know what it means, if you don't already know what it means.
Right. Okay. Towards the bottom of page 67, we get a string of Korean words, and I'm going to help you get through it.
Yes.
So it starts with, when my mother asked me what I did in school, I would answer something like this. I sang a nore. Nore means a song, which is also why you get norebang, which is karaoke in Korean. Next she says, played handball with my 친구, which is friend, and drew a kurim of our house. Kurim is a drawing. I had a lot of chemi, and that's not Jamae, that's chemi, and chemi means fun. If you also go to page 69, if you have the book, there's a very crucial, important part in here where she talks about the letter, the rir, which is in Korean. It's one of our letters. So she even draws it out later in the book, but the way that she describes it is really well. It's like if you had one of those old alarm clocks that had the digital output, but it was just those lines.
Yes.
It's the number 2 with that look. So the word rir is the reason why Korean people have a lot of trouble saying the L word. Now, she described it as a sound that's somewhere between R and L, which is sometimes true, but not all the time. So I think the Korean language has started adapting. The R and L sound is when the rir is attached to the other consonant. So Korean is a different way of attaching it, but if it doesn't start with that letter and it's attached later, that's often where you get it. So words like sarang or 설렁탕 or salsa, things like that are going to have that R and L sound rather than, and honestly it's a lot more Americanized words. Things like ramen or rote or radio, things like that have more of the R sound. But that became a very distinct part of the Korean language. So I don't know how many people know about this, but Lululemon, which is a company started by not a great man, who is now ousted. So I think they're doing better. But Lululemon's name came from the fact that that person who created the company thought it would be funny that Asian people can't say the name. So the name Lululemon would be really hard for my parents to say because they never had those letters in our language. It would always come out as Rururemen, or honestly Rururemana, or something like that. But yeah, I was very glad that she incorporated this. There is another piece in here where she talks about the F and P's. Like Koreans don't have F's, we only have P's. So I think that's a very important thing to remember. It's not saying that you need to necessarily remember how to say these words, but it also gives definition to why when people use racist interpretations of accents and things like that, that's why we have it. It's not that they don't know how to adapt to it, it's just they never how to say it.
Right. And when we are growing up and learning how to speak, our facial muscles and our muscles within our mouths form based on the languages we speak. So it's not to say that no one can adapt later on in life, but it's harder because those muscles are not the same muscles as other languages use.
So I did find out with the R sound, I saw a linguist online, and it was really cool how they broke it down. So if you did want to say the word sarang, and you wanted to say it more Korean, our L's, our tongue tends to touch the back of our teeth. So if we say like love, our tongue is touching the back of the top
Your
teeth.
palate.
Right. But right at the right next to the teeth. Our R sounds, our tongue is kind of held back towards the back of the mouth. So if you wanted to say the word sarang and use the rir, move that tongue from that L position towards the middle of your palate and then use it like that L word. So sarang.
Sarang.
Yeah. So that's how you get that like RL kind of sound.
Nice.
So I thought that was really interesting.
Nice.
Yeah. So that's the first 5. What did you think so far?
I loved it. Like you mentioned, there were many laugh out loud moments for me during these essays, and I really enjoyed them as if I were reading them for the first time because I forgot most of these stories. And yes, I appreciate her honesty. I appreciate that she opened these doors and was very frank about how her mom treated her, how her dad and her brother were kind of like in the background. Yeah, and like how honest she was about her wants and needs as a child and in the present, or at least not necessarily the present day Annie, but the grown-up Annie. She didn't hold anything back, which is what I appreciated.
I genuinely love this book, and I'm a little sad that I don't know if I did it justice. I think us covering the book, we're trying to do our best of breaking down these essays.
Yeah.
But I think the true value and where I found the love of this book was in the way that it's written.
Yes.
It's kind of like when I'm trying to repeat a joke that Ali Wong says or something.
Yeah.
It's just not quite as funny without the context, without the setup.
Without the delivery.
Yes, and I think that's what Annie Choi does so well in this book. This is one that I don't know if I'm going to be able to fully break down with the authenticity that she writes. So I highly, highly, highly recommend getting this book, borrowing it, buying it, whatever it may be.
Right.
This may become my favorite book of the year, to be honest. Like, this has been... I loved Malika's book. I very, very much enjoyed Little Fires Everywhere. There have been some other books I've read on my free time kind of at the end of last year and into this year. But truly, I don't feel like I've connected with the book as much as I did in these first 5 essays. So I'm so excited to read the next few chapters and essays.
Totally.
And I would highly recommend you just reading through it. It's a very quick read. It's very easy.
Yes.
And it's so funny. Genuinely, I can't remember the last time I laughed out loud in a book. And this one made me do it so many times.
For sure. I am excited as well. So, for our next section of reading, we're reading chapters 6 through 10, which can be found between pages 77 to 160. And the essays we're reading are Period Piece, Holy Crap, The Best Diet, Vegetarian Enough, and The Devil Moisturizes. What are your predictions just based off the titles of the essays?
So we're going to talk about menstruation.
That's what I think too.
Something in church. Maybe something about weight. Then no meat. Or maybe less meat. And then back to church.
I agree about menstruation, about weight, and about less meat, I think Holy Crap is going to be about poop.
You know, we do talk about poop a lot in Korean culture.
And I think The Devil Moisturizes is going to talk about skincare and how maybe, like, again, I don't remember these essays as much as I thought I did. So I'm thinking that in skincare for The Devil Moisturizes, I think this is coming from the lens of not liking it.
So we'll hit those next 5 essays on our next read. But until then, if anyone wants to join in on our conversation, comment, have questions, how can they reach us?
You can find us on Instagram at Asian Book Club Pod, or you can email us at asianbookclubpod, P-O-D, @gmail.com.
Yep, and you can also check us out at our website, which is asianbookclubpod.com. This is also where you can find our bookshop, which should have Happy Birthday or whatever also listed in there, and you can buy from there, which also gives us a little bit of portion, but enough to just get us slightly by.
Yes, or it can get us a coffee.
Yes. Join us on our next read, and until next time, if this book has taught us one thing, it's to stay true to our shelf. Bye.